Hey Defenders, welcome back. In this video, I want to show you guys how we can use Wazuh to ingest our GuardDuty logs that we receive within AWS. So this will allow Wazuh to reach out to AWS and retrieve all of our GuardDuty events that have triggered and bring them down into our Elasticsearch so we can actually view them within our own Kibana. So we don't have to jump to the AWS console to view all of our AWS logs. So the steps for this video, I'm actually going to go through the whole configuring GuardDuty process. We will enable GuardDuty, we will create a Firehose, we will send those logs to an S3 bucket. We will then configure Wazuh to pull in our logs from the S3 bucket where we can then view alerts within Kibana. So I'm going to approach this video assuming that no configuration for GuardDuty or Firehose or S3 has been done. So hopefully this will take you guys through the whole process so you guys can actually replicate this on your own. So I'm in my AWS account here, and here you see I have one EC2 instance running on this account. Now let's go ahead and actually first configure GuardDuty. And configure GuardDuty is very easy. If you want to search for the service, you could just type it in here and AWS will link you to the GuardDuty service. I think they give you a 30-day trial. I don't know how much it costs, so be cautious. Don't just enable this in like a demo environment and forget to disable it and leave it running, because AWS will charge you for this. So just a word of caution there. AWS can get very expensive very quickly if you aren't managing what services you are paying for. So just a little word of caution there. But let's go ahead and enable GuardDuty. So GuardDuty will use detection rules to detect like network traffic going into your server and out of your server, all your EC2 instances. It also will monitor like unusual API calls or potentially like unauthorized deployments that could indicate a possible account compromise. It's really easy to enable, which is really nice. AWS makes it really easy, and there's a ton of rules. I know you can like add your own rules and like lists, I think too. I'm not going to get into that. So like here you can add a threat list. I'm not going to get into that in this video, maybe a video later down the road. But now that we have GuardDuty enabled, let's configure our S3 bucket where we will send our GuardDuty alerts to. So I'm just going to duplicate out a new tab, and I'm going to just search for S3. And here I'm just going to say create bucket. And I'll call it, this does have to be a unique name across all AWS environments. So just using something like GuardDuty is probably already taken. So I like to preference it with just the company name. So I'll say Open Secure GuardDuty, and I'll just leave it in my US East 1 region. That's fine. And then I will block all public access. So later in the video, we are going to create a IAM user that has a role that will be able to access our S3 bucket, because we don't want this bucket publicly exposed, and we want some access control so that we can authenticate users trying to access the logs within our bucket. So I'm going to go ahead and select create bucket. All right, and now let's actually create a delivery stream that will take our GuardDuty events and send them into our S3 bucket. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up a new tab, and I'm going to search for the service called Kinesis. So I'm going to select Kinesis, and here I'm actually going to create a delivery stream. So we're going to process and deliver data streams. And our data stream in this case will be our GuardDuty events to our S3 bucket. So I'm going to go ahead and select create delivery stream. And we will want our source to be a direct put. And then we want our destination to be an S3 bucket. So I'm going to select Amazon S3. It's going to ask for a delivery stream name, which you can just leave it at that. Yeah, I'll just leave it at the default, so that's fine. And now let's go ahead and select, okay, now that we're telling our delivery stream we want to put it to an S3 bucket, now let's tell it what S3 bucket we want to put it to. So we're going to select, should be able to browse, and I should see, yeah, so here we see our Open Secure GuardDuty S3 bucket. So you will, so again, make sure you follow steps in this order. You will need to create your S3 bucket first, or else if you try to do this step prior to creating your S3 bucket, your bucket will not exist. So we'll go ahead and choose that. And then we can go ahead and set a prefix. This is optional. What this will do is within your bucket, so it would be your first kind of tree down into your bucket. So rather than putting it all kind of in the root directory here, we could say like /firehose, for example. So maybe I'm throwing like WAF logs as well. If I want to keep those separated, I would just create a different prefix for that. So here I'll just say GuardDuty. All right, and that looks good. Let's go ahead and scroll down to advanced settings, and let's actually create this IAM rule. So we're actually going to have AWS create this rule for us. We don't actually have to go through that process, which is nice. So we are all done there. So let's go ahead and create our delivery stream. And all right, that's looking good. Let me go ahead and open a new tab. And now let's actually create a rule for when do we want this delivery stream to actually fire? Well, we want this to fire when we get a GuardDuty event. So we're going to create a rule within CloudWatch that will do that for us. So if we go ahead and search for the CloudWatch service, we will then go into events and we will select rules. And I guess AWS is migrating this to a new service called EventBridge. So that's fine. So we'll just say go to Amazon EventBridge. All right, and now let's go ahead and create our rule. So I'm going to say create rule. And for rule name, I'll just say GuardDuty delivery. And I won't do a description, that's fine. We'll leave event bus as default, and then we'll say rule with event pattern. So we'll go ahead and say next. And here I'm going to say, so I'm not going to say all events. I'm going to, since we are using the GuardDuty AWS service, I'm going to select AWS services. I am then going to scroll down. I think this is just like a sample. Yeah, that's just a sample of what like alerts would look like. So we can scroll down here into where we actually want to configure our event pattern. So here we can then select a service provider. And again, we are going to look for GuardDuty. So I'll go ahead and select GuardDuty, and we will select an event type. And in this case, I'll just say all events. So we get GuardDuty findings, and then I guess any potentially malicious API calls as well. So I don't have CloudTrail enabled though, so I probably won't get anything there. So I'll just say all events, and then our rule is populated with this JSON. So that's looking good. So I'll go ahead and say next. And now we need to define a target that this will actually go to. So we instructed what we want the rule to trigger on, which will be when a GuardDuty event occurs. Now we need to select where do we then want to send that. And we will select our target. And here we are actually going to select our Firehose. So I will just say our AWS service. And then since we just created our Kinesis Firehose, right, this guy here, that is what I want to use for this instance. So here I have Firehose delivery stream. So we'll go ahead and select that. Now let's go ahead and select our stream, which is the one that we just created by default, this put S3, which directly relates to our name here, right? So that's looking good. I'll go ahead and say create a new role for this. That's fine. I'll let AWS create the access role for this. So that's fine. I'll go ahead and select next, and you can configure tags if you want. I won't do that in this video. I will select next, and then now we can review and just make sure everything's looking good. So stepping through it again, our source of what we want to collect will be our AWS GuardDuty event, and then our selected target will be our Firehose delivery stream that we previously created. So that's all looking good. And then again, that Firehose will route that data to our S3 bucket, which is our open secure GuardDuty. So that's all looking good. Let's go ahead and create rule. And all right, so we see our rule is now created. So everything is looking good. Now let's actually see if, and okay, cool. So here we can now see our GuardDuty alerts being populated. And here we can see my public IP address. So cool, that's looking good. And this is what GuardDuty alerts, look like within the console. You could use just the GuardDuty console as your kind of window into investigating these alerts. But what we would like to do is to actually bring this into Wazuh. So we have our kind of single pane of glass of all of our security related alerts. whether they be Wazuh, you know, triggering the rules, or relying on third-party services like GuardDuty to detect security events for us. If we now go into our S3 bucket, and if we refresh, we see our GuardDuty object has now been created with a timestamp of the year, which is awesome. So if I go back, we have our GuardDuty bucket here. So I'll select this guy, and now we see, you will have to give it a little bit of time. I actually updated my GuardDuty settings to frequency for updated findings. I changed this to every 15 minutes. I don't know if that's actually necessary or not, but I went ahead and did that anyways. But just be aware, if you don't see them, if you see GuardDuty events, but you don't see them within your S3 bucket immediately, it may take a little bit of time to actually get there. So now if we actually drill down into the directory structure itself, so it looks like we have GuardDuty 2022, and then it prefaces it with the month. So we are in March, so we have an 03, and then the day. So today is March 13th. So I don't know how the 17 is generated, maybe some timestamp that AWS is looking at under the hood. And then we see two entries. This first one, this 22D, is just a test one that I did, so we can disregard that. But here we see our GuardDuty event now come in. So if we actually go ahead and select this guy, and this should just be a JSON file. So let's go ahead and download. And let me bring this over for you guys. And here we see the JSON of our GuardDuty event. Right, so AWS is just logging this via JSON, and thankfully Wazuh is able to decode and parse through JSON data by default without us having to add anything. And here we see some of the metadata. So like we see the policy that triggered, right? So here we have the root credentials usage. We see the IP address that I was coming from, so that generated this alert. So that's cool. And then we get some other kind of meta details around all this. So let's first actually make sure Wazuh can decode this. So I'm going to copy this whole JSON block here, and I'm going to go onto my manager. I'm going to run a rule set test just to make sure that Wazuh is actually able to decode this like I'm hoping it is. So I'll paste that in there and then just run a test. And actually it is not. So before we actually configure Wazuh to ingest these logs, we need to make sure it can actually alert on it. So we will actually need to create a Wazuh rule. So that's fine. So let me go ahead and let's see what would be. Let me actually use a JSON parser real quick so I can see what field we can go ahead and grab. So probably a good one to match on will be our source and then AWS GuardDuty. So I'll use that to categorize on AWS GuardDuty findings. So okay, so here in my local rules, I'll say AWS _ GuardDuty, and I'll also give it a group of Amazon. Just copy an above rule ID block. Actually, let me just copy this block. That'll be easy. And paste that there. Let me close the group out. And let me increase the rule ID. Okay. And then, so this will be decoded as JSON. We know that because these will be all JSON content. So we can leave that. And then what I want to do is the field name, I'm actually going to say source. So I'm going to copy that value and paste this guy here. And then I'm going to say must equal to AWS GuardDuty because that will be with every alert. So I'll paste that there, and I'll give it a description of AWS GuardDuty alert, and I'll just leave the option as no full log. That's fine. So we'll go ahead and save and then restart, and then let's run another rule set test to verify that our Wazuh manager will be able to alert on this log accordingly. All right, so our manager was restarted. So I'll go ahead and copy a block again. Select rule set test, select test. And good, here we can see the log actually now being decoded. And if we scroll down, we see it matching on our rule ID that we just created. So, okay, good. So this is looking good. And here we can see all the contents that is being stripped out. So good. Okay, that's looking good. Now let's actually configure Wazuh to be able to make the API call out to AWS to retrieve the contents of our S3 bucket. So I'm going to jump back into AWS here, and what we now want to do is actually create a new IAM user that our Wazuh manager will use to authenticate with AWS. So we don't want to give our Wazuh manager just our root access and secret key, just in case our Wazuh box is ever compromised for whatever reason. You know, those keys would actually exist on the box. So I am going to go into IAM, go into users. I am then going to add a user. And for the username, I'll just say Wazuh-AWS. And I am just going to select access key. So this will give us a access key ID and then a secret access key. So the difference between these two is if we gave it a password, this user would actually be able to log on to the AWS console, what I'm interacting with here, and we don't need that. This user is just going to be used for API requests, so we're just going to select the access key. Next, we'll give it permissions, and we're going to select attach existing policies, and then let's actually go ahead and create a new policy. And this policy will be what allows our Wazuh user to actually connect to our S3 bucket. So I'm going to go into the JSON editor. I'm going to remove that away. And I'm going to paste this JSON block in its place. So what this policy will allow us to do is so we are referencing our S3, right? We are then calling the actions of get object, list bucket, and then delete object. So this will allow this role to perform these various functions within S3. And now we need to provide it a specific S3 resource, and this will be our bucket. So here you will just replace, so if you're following along here, you will just replace OpenSecure-GuardDuty with your actual bucket name. And again, that will be reflected here. So if we go into my S3 bucket, you'll just copy whatever value you are outputting your GuardDuty logs to there. So that's looking good. I'll also throw this out on the GitHub so you guys can follow along. So I'll put a link in the description there. So we'll go ahead and select next. I won't do any tags. I'll just say review, and for the policy name, since we created a new policy, I'll just say, all right, and I'll go ahead and select create, and okay, cool. So now so now our policy is created. So if we go back into our tab where we are actually creating our new user, I'll go ahead and select refresh, and we should be able to now find the policy that we just created, which was, I'll just search for Wazuh. So here we see GuardDuty S3 Wazuh. So we'll go ahead and check that guy. We'll say the tags, that's optional. So I'm just gonna say skip. You'll say review, and we will go ahead and create the user. And then we should, yeah, so now here we get our access key and then our secret key, which are important. So make sure you copy these values. So I'm gonna copy my access key, and then I'm gonna also copy my secret key. I will be blowing this user account away before I post this video, so please don't try to get into my buckets with these credentials. They will not work. A little disclaimer. Okay, so that's looking good. So I'll go ahead and select close. All right, and now let's actually get onto our Wazuh manager, and let's go ahead and set this up. So I'm on the box that's running my Wazuh manager. I'm going to create a new file where I'm going to store these keys. And first, I'm actually going to create a hidden directory. So I'll just call it, I'll put it in the root, and then let me actually cd into that directory, and I'll have no contents here. And now I'm actually just going to create a credentials file. And this will be the file where I'll actually put my access and secret key that we just generated. So the contents of this file here, I'm just going to select my I'm going to specify a profile. In this case, this would be default. If you want to add multiple keys, you can. So I could add another profile that I call, like, I don't know, maybe dev. And then I could add another one that I call prod. And so on and so forth. So you can add as many keys as you can add as many profiles to this file as you want. But in this video, I'm just going to say the default. And then here we will paste in our access key ID, which will be this guy that we copied here. So I'll paste that there. And then our secret access key will be this value here. And this is what Wazuh will use to make the API call out to AWS to retrieve our logs. The region, I believe, was US East 1. Yeah, in Virginia. So I'm going to leave at US East 1. So that's fine. So I'm going to go ahead and save that off. And now let's actually go into our osec.conf to enable the AWS WUDL. So what's nice is Wazuh has already built the Python scripts that we will use under the hood to make the calls out to AWS. So if we go into var osec WUDLs, we see into AWS, you can see our Python script, s3.py. We can see this script has already been created for us, and this comes with the default Wazuh install, which is nice. And we can interact with this via our WUDL. So I'll go into var osec etc osec.conf. All right, so I'll scroll down to like where we did our health check once. That's fine. So create a new entry. Let me actually zoom out a little bit. Okay, good. And now I'm going to paste in our WUDL, our AWS S3 WUDL. So here I'm specifying the WUDL name. So again, we're referencing the AWS S3 WUDL, and I'll also link to the Wazuh's documentation on this in the description below as well. Disable is set to no. Interval, so you can set an interval how often you want this to run. I'm just going to say for this case, just every minute for this demo, so it'll be fast. Run on start, we'll say yes. So when the Wazuh Manager service is restarted, it'll run this regardless of what the interval is set at. So you could set that to no if you want. Skip on error, I'm actually going to say no. And now let's specify our actual bucket profile here, right? So go ahead and copy. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this here. And here we are saying here we are now telling Wazuh, okay, what is the bucket that we want to grab from? So our type will just be GuardDuty. Our bucket name, we are going to replace with our actual name of our bucket, which in our case is Open Secure GuardDuty. So I'm going to copy that value there and paste that there. And then you could set the path if you want, and that references to your prefix. So in this case, my path, if I wanted to set it, it is optional. If you're maybe logging multiple alerts into one S3 bucket, so like maybe your WAF alerts are also going to this, and you want to keep them separated, you could specify that within your Wazuh path here. So I'm going to go ahead and actually just remove that line because I'm not going to use it. And then here we have our AWS profile, and this will relate directly to what we just created in our file. So if I save this and open up that credentials file that we just created, you'll see the profile is named default. Now, if this was if you use a different name, you need to make sure you reflect that within your osec.conf. And okay, good. And now we need to go ahead and close our WUDL bracket here. So that's good. It's good. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and let's restart our Wazuh Manager. All right, and let me go ahead and let's go ahead and tail the log file, and we should see our AWS module trigger out, and we should hopefully see that it was able to fetch and then ingest the logs. And here we go. So here we see starting fetching of logs, executing bucket analysis. So here we see it reference our open secure GuardDuty. The type is GuardDuty profile, and then fetching logs finished. So that's looking good. So now if I go into modules and I select Amazon AWS, we can see my GuardDuty alerts starting to come in. We see the S3 buckets that we are grabbing from. So here we see our open secure GuardDuty. And if we select the events, we now see our GuardDuty alerts starting to come through. And if we select the drop down, we see all of the metadata as well. So pretty cool. So we're now able to ingest AWS GuardDuty alerts into our SIEM solution. So I think that wraps it up for today's video. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next one.